My name is Reed Price, and I am the director of the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. And we are grateful for your participation today in what we do Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and sometimes other times. We call it Something to Talk About. And it is sponsored in part by the folks at Fieldstone Memory Care of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, and they are now accepting residents. They also are offering day stay and respite programs. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people. And the Coast Salish, the Suquamish people, are the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and are grateful to be their neighbors. Ann Lovejoy is going to introduce today's Sippin Tea. And we're going to talk a little bit. And if you have some tea, get your cup ready.
Great. Hey, everybody, we're going to lift a cup here. I'm so grateful, Akuyea, for your amazing generosity in joining us and suggesting this series of tea sipping together, because Karen and I have talked a lot about having conversations that allow us all to talk about things that maybe might be uncomfortable or that maybe don't get really addressed because people think it's not okay, or have questions and are kind of worried about how to ask them appropriately. I never worry about being appropriate because I'm often inappropriate. I'm a little aspy and, you know, it happens. So we hit it off really well because Akuyea is endlessly tolerant and kind and generous. And Marva, thank you so much too for joining us again. Marva Jones, who has worked with Akuyea for many years with kids in Kitsap, in schools mostly, but also in some of the amazing art programs and history work they've done with young people of color especially. Very powerful. And we welcome Marwan too, Marwan Cameron, who does the Conduit podcasts you may have listened to, and if you haven't, you're going to want to, because he does amazing coverage of a lot of the things that are going on in Kitsap and around the area.
I'm not hearing a thing.
You don't hear me?
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
We're grateful you're here. Thank you for coming. I'm going to just suggest that if you're not a panelist, you might want to just mute yourself. And if you are, please don't. Please feel free to jump in and speak. Hey, Chastity. And also, these are conversations, so they're open. And if you have a question, you can raise your hand and you can post something in the chat, or you can, if there's a pause, God forbid there should be a pause, there might be though. If there's a pause, you can jump in and say, hey, I'm really wondering about XYZ, right?
And you can always use the reactions or the hand raising of Zoom. I'll keep an eye on that part.
Oh, thank you, Reed, because you know me, I get distracted easily. Anyway, I hope you've all got a cup of something nice and warm, and we're going to jump right in. And this week, our conversation is about the Truth and Reconciliation movement and how that might be manifesting here in Kitsap County and in our part of Washington State. What that could even look like, what we're hoping for, how we want to realize it, all those things. Akuyea, do you want to start us off?
Well, hello, family. How's everybody doing today? Everybody looks great. Well, yeah, let's just jump in and just start chatting, because I think it's important that we have these conversations and that we really just be intentional about some of the work we want to do. Last year, with our Breaking Bread team from our KitsapERACEcoalition, we were intentional about looking at what truth and reconciliation will look like for our communities and for our county. We know that this is a global and national and county-wide different initiatives around the globe, but what does it look like for us here in Kitsap County? And then let's talk about the need that we all have as human beings to hold humanity and repair. And then what does that mean? How do you reconcile harm that has happened in history, across the cultures, across families, individuals? What do we have to do to begin to cultivate that type of movement where we're doing intervention and prevention, and we're addressing them before they start spiraling into some real crises? And why do we have to wait till a crisis emerge before we start doing the work of repair and restoration and reconciliation and healing? And so as we talk about it today, you know, what does that look like? Because it's going to take all of us to step into the work of truth and reconciliation, whether it's in your own families, with your own community members, or someone you might even have an art with, and repair of that relationship. So we're leveling the playing field this morning when we talk about truth and reconciliation, because I think so many times people take it and make it something huge when we have to start right where we're at, to start to repair and to reconcile and to heal. You know, if I have an art with Miss Marva, I hope that I can start repairing that right away and say, Marva, can we talk? Can we begin to address, where did it go wrong? You know, how were you feeling in the midst of all of this? So, you know, let's just jump in and have the conversation, everybody, and really just set that on the table so we can move forward.
Absolutely. That is, you always nail it so well. But yeah, there, you know, and right there's about 15 things we could pick apart and follow. But I really am thinking a lot about a lot of the movements that I'm aware of, the truth and reconciliation movements, have kind of been confrontational. And I totally get why that is so. But I'm feeling like you often say that you want to see us calling people in, not calling people out.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about how much easier it is to hear criticism when it's gentle and loving than when it's attack. Most of us tend to retreat when we feel like we're being accused, even correctly, of things that we actually have done or things that are ours to hold. So I'm thinking about your approach and thinking, how can we make it invitational rather than confrontational? Mm-hmm. And maybe Marwan, you want to say something about that too, Marwan or Marva, either one of you.
Well, I think we have to meet people where they are. You know, everybody's in this world, or even in our community, or even in our homes. We all come from different places and different upbringing. And so I always believe in meeting people where they are. Some people are not ready to confront truth and is not ready for truth and reconciliation. You have to be ready for that. And so the goal is, how do you get ready? How do you prepare yourself so that you can walk into truthfulness in your community? And so one of the gentlemen I work with at my church, he'll just invite you. Hey, would you like to have a conversation? That's his way of opening the door for a positive conversation. May not be agreeable, but at least he's saying, can we talk? And so that's what I've been practicing lately. I met with a young girl yesterday. I understood there was some challenges, and I just said, can I go off for some tea, have some tea with you and your sister, so we can have a conversation? So the goal for me is to rebuild. And I'm not coming with my baggage to beat them up. I'm coming with, let me understand where you're coming from. So I think that's the truth that we have to get to, even in race critical theories, even in, the Black Lives Matter, and all these different components. We have to begin to just ask the conversation. Doesn't have to be in a large group. It could be in a small group, so we can have understanding, because in all that understanding, getting to understand one another, we begin to say, wow, we're not so far off after all. So I just think that that's one way that we can start making change and begin to reconcile in this big movement that we're dealing with today.
Oh, it's such a generous, open-hearted way too. And I am so grateful for that, because it makes it easier, a lot easier, to feel like you can bring things up, or you can respond and say, I'm probably super ignorant here, or I'm very naive about this, or I don't know much about that. But you don't feel like you're going to get ripped open, you're going to get greeted. And that makes it much, much easier. Not that, you know, it's anybody's job to cater to my weakness, but I think when we're all looking at each other compassionately, we see we're all broken. We're all flawed people, right? And so we just have to be kind. I mean, I think.
You know, one of the things that I would hope is that all of this work that we are seeding, because I always say we have to seed and we have to cultivate, we have to nurture, we have to grow into this. One of the things that we're hoping that we can seed is love, because without love and compassion and being able to forgive one another when things have gone so terribly wrong, we're not going to be able to get to that place of healing. And sometimes I think when we're talking about we're not ready to forgive because we're still embittered and we're still, you know, angry, and we're still at that place where we're ready to lash out at one another and begin to, you know, to continue the what I would call the fight. You know, we just got to fight, and we got to be right. And I think when we come from that place, what we do is we continue to pour gasoline on the fire, and not move towards that place of forgiveness and repair and healing. So we've got to talk about how will we get there? You know, what will we do to move towards this reconciliation? We've been dealing with over 400 years of enslavement of the African Americans that was enslaved to this nation here. And we still see the roots of all of that still manifesting itself, because even though we were given our emancipation and our freedoms, and then we went through all of the Reconstruction and all the Black codes and all of the different systems that was constructed to oppress, and we still addressed them during the civil rights movement, and we're still moving towards repair and reconciliation. We still haven't done the deep work of healing all of those atrocities. And it's not just within the African American community, it's within the Native community, it's within the Asian communities, many communities of color, it's across cultures. How do we get out of this merry-go-round into a place where we can begin to move forward in a healthier way? Am I saying that poof, it's going to be done overnight? Nothing is done overnight. We know that. But how do we begin to cultivate and move, you know, step by step, little by little, to a place where we can at least come together like we're doing right now and sip some tea and be truthful and talk about our stuff and put our stuff on the table? Because that to me is the beginning. We have to confess, and we have to acknowledge, and we have to be able to speak about it and not continue to tuck it under the rug as if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think that's really huge, that acknowledging each other, acknowledging the huge weeping need to have these conversations is an incredibly positive place to start, even if, like Marva was saying, even if it isn't always agreeable. It doesn't have to be agreeable. I don't think we're looking for sunshine in a, you know, in a posy here, but we're talking about real truth is so powerful and so healing, even when it's hard. And reconciliation is such a huge term that we don't have much experience with. Reed, did you want to say something?
One of the challenges, it seems, especially maybe for white people, is to recognize that that you can own the history without owning the guilt. In other words, you can be somebody different than your ancestors were, and that might be a way out of the friction that we feel whenever the topic of white supremacy comes up, because it seems like a lot of people get very defensive about that, and that shuts down the conversation. That defensiveness shuts down the conversation.
It does. And, you know, for all of us, and in every conversation of any kind. Chastity, do you want to jump in?
I hate it when you agree so hard, and that's Dr. D from Islandwood. I hate it when you agree so hard that you're moving your hands. And it was to what Marwan and what Christina had written about what Marwan said about community contracts and Akuyea, but Reed made a really interesting point, and that is that, you know, this whole concept of who are you identifying with, the abolitionists or the people that were practicing and were colonizers and slaves. The reason why they get so triggered is because they weren't taught about all the abolitionists. They weren't taught about those individuals. And so the only choice they think in history is the one who is doing the wrong, the oppressor. And so this goes back to why it's so important to tell people's whole stories, to tell about all of the people who allied and who were fighting for what was right during that time. And because we are ill-equipped to know our history, we can't identify with those people that were there because they make it invisible, right? In the indigenous and the Black and the Latinx and even in our Jewish community. So like, yeah, more of that, Reed.
Thank you, Chastity.
Aaron has a hand up.
Oh, Aaron first and then Carrie. How's that?
Hey, everybody. Can y'all hear me? My connection's a little spotty today. Okay, thanks, Chaz. I like Chaz's hands. I know I wanted to offer a quick thing. So I'm white, European heritage. I've been about, I guess, 20 years now, like actively involved in anti-racist work. And one of the things that I find is reoccurring for me as a person, you know, raised white, but also I've talked with other folks about it where, you know, there's some particular part of their perspective that gets reflected by kind of the dominant or mainstream thing. So it might be because they're male or it might be because they're straight or whatever. But for me, I think about it because I'm white, is being raised with an idea such that I can only spot things if they look like the way it looked to me. So what does it look like to come into a conversation from a perspective of love? And what I realize over years of doing the work is a big piece of the work is understanding that just because at first blush, the approach might look like something that I don't identify as love or I don't identify as whatever, doesn't mean that it's not that to the other person, right? So I think for me, it's been important to challenge myself and other white people to not interpret this volume of voice, this particular word, this particular hand gesture as not loving or too harsh or whatever, right? So I wanted to throw that out there because I think in truth telling, one of the biggest gifts for me has been that realization, so that I'm excited to like get the gift of someone telling me the truth in the way it works for them to tell me, not trying to bend it to whatever they think is hopefully going to make me hear it. And that to me is like, then I feel like I'm getting the real truth, and that's the huge gift. From there, we really can do different kind of work. And if I think they're doing lots of gymnastics in order to hope that I can hear a piece of it.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. That makes a huge amount of sense emotionally and intellectually. Carrie, I think I see Christina's hand, but I think Carrie, you had something to say too.
I guess one of the things I was thinking about is that I hear that I'm sensitive to hear is for my own journey at the beginning of it, just that resistance that rises up, that we are uncomfortable with these conversations, or we're comfortable with our positionality as being white. And how, you know, we're always trying to somehow appease that in a way that as though We want to alleviate guilt, or we don't want to be connected with this history of horror and pain. But at the same time, it's like what's really served me well is to work on resisting that resistance. That that resistance is a wall, that just defensive mechanism that comes up and thinks that we need protecting in some way. And to always be addressing that, to me, is just it's frustrating. But I get it, because I understand. But like for me, being able to recognize that and be able to say, I'm not going to allow myself to have that, allowed me to be vulnerable and to stay listening and to stay learning. And what really, I think that as a white person, we have to understand that we've been sold a lie about our identity and how we are so lacking in this experience as a whole, and just the damage that has come to us, that we have, we're existing out of a lie that's not even true about what white identity even is. And that to me is so damaging. When I think about just the culture and how even everything that we see that exists today has been, so much has been left out culturally in the diversity of what really truly is, whether it's, scholars of color, artists of color, voices of color, and how much different our world would look if we had all been joined together collectively to create a world that expresses the whole. And so that, to me, is something really worth digging into in the white culture, and say that in and of itself is we just spent so much time saying, I don't want to feel uncomfortable, but it's like there's so much more to explore if we could just stop babying that whole thing. And so I guess that's kind of what frustrates me sometimes, even with the critical race. I hear, oh, we don't want our white kids to feel sad. Well, are you kidding me? Like, we should feel some sadness, in the sense that all that is the reality of it, and that's not a bad thing to begin to feel sad about something, because that sadness includes what has been lost to us as well, in our collective identity as an individual. So,
oh, thank you, Carrie. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Christina, did you still want to jump in?
Sure. A couple things. I'll try not to talk too long. I want to thank the Bainbridge Island Senior Center, because I think you're modeling a community behavior that we hope that others are going to follow suit. I mean, the act of learning and trying to unlearn and understand perspectives other than your own. I think that's a beautiful thing. The topic that you have today around truth and reconciliation, and I know how it's dear to leaders like Akuyea and Marva and Marwan, to move towards, to be actionable, right? And to be to move towards solutions that are all inclusive. So I appreciate the voices, Chaz's and Carrie's, who spoke. I'm feeling a little bit of air, because I know Marwan is trying to work on his audio and video, but I think what I just want to make sure we don't lose is the piece around truth. There are the pandemic allowed us to really shine a light on systems that weren't working for everybody, and there is a moment in this time, in this moment of history. What can we do now that we know better? How can we do better? And then is that conversation holding truths and hearing each other in that process without defensiveness? And I think that's a very hard practice. And then I think there's a beautiful thing, and I don't want to ever forget, because I always forget talking about Bishop Robertson's salad bowl, but the idea of acknowledging everybody's gift to the table, and not blending it up and losing people's identities or what they're contributing, but really acknowledging for what it is, and then being able to move towards action. So I'm going to stop talking, but I'm hoping others will chime in.
Actually, I think that's an incredibly good point about this is, the whole melting pot metaphor is not just outdated, it's really offensive. And I think we need to get used to diversity instead of trying to blend everything to look like us, to sort of say how great that it's more than that it isn't all just one thing mushed up together like baby food in a jar, right? That becoming comfortable with what's new and comfortable with what shouldn't be new without his defensiveness. As you say, that's a really difficult practice, but I feel like just opening these conversations helps us think beyond them too, right? Like all of us will take something home and ponder and think more about any of these things that are being brought up. Marva.
I have a question. So this is wonderful that we are having these conversations because it promotes change. And those that may be listening, they can start thinking about ways they can change. So my question to all of you is, since the Black Lives Matter movement came about, which was not Rodney King, that was way back. But since this change has come, have you changed? Have you, within the last 2 years during this COVID time, has there have been any changes that you have made, 1 or 2 changes that you say, wow, I used to think like this, but I don't think like that anymore, or I'm working on that thought process or my behavior? Have all of you have made some major changes within the last 2 years since the Black Lives Matter initiative came about and people started talking about it? So I just want to know, I haven't heard anybody say, well, yes, I have. I think I've heard Carrie made changes, but I'm just wondering if you guys have made any changes since then.
Anybody want to speak to that, Debbie?
Christina has also raised her hand.
Okay. I saw
Hi,
Debbie.
everyone.
Go ahead.
Christina.
Yeah, I had this realization early on that I felt really bad that I knew racism existed. I'm not that ignorant. I knew that it was there, but me being a white person, what shocked me is I really didn't know it was still as bad as it is. And that's me because of where my situation was. And I feel very horrible that I didn't know how bad it was, that I wasn't in tune to that. But it was also just admitting wholeheartedly that because of who I am and how I'm positioned in this society, I did not know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much for that.
I think a lot of people are in that position, actually.
Well, I'm in response to Marva's question, similar to Christina. I mean, I'm quite embarrassed as a white woman, having gone through almost 50 some years and not having taken the time to learn history, the whole of history. So in the last 5 or 6 years, probably more than the last 2 years, like you asked, Marva, I've started to learn like a lot and unlearn and take action in joining with the community. And so a lot has changed in my life, but it's really no excuse for 55 years of ignorance, but it's changing.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes,
Yeah,
Karen, come on in
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, it's another Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Karen.
So, and Debbie, I feel the same way. When I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, I was horrified. I would read about 5 pages and break down and cry. If you haven't read the book, read it. It's amazing. It was life-changing for me. But it's what I didn't learn. I mean, we could have dug and understood and read maybe Howard Zinn's, the People's History, but not everybody had to access that. They didn't have a college class with that. But so much that was not given to us, so much history. Like I didn't know about Tulsa, about Black Wall Street, the bomb by our own country. I mean, that was so terrifying and heartbreaking, and it still is. And I don't know, I can never get over this. But one thing I do know is my children know about it, and their children are going to know about it. And so we have to move forward.
Yeah.
And again, Karen, so important that love Yeah, we gotta love each other. Yeah, so I'm sorry, we're breaking down.
Don't be sorry, be human. You know, this is another thing. We're embarrassed to be real. We're embarrassed to be truthful. We're embarrassed to be pierced to the heart.
Yeah.
But we have to be able to be transparent and vulnerable with each other, or we'll never get past it.
Right.
Barbara O.
Hi. So I just wanted to say, in terms of a change, this was actually before the Black Lives Matter movement, but maybe 7 years or so ago, I thought, I'm just going to start reading people of color. That I realized how much of my reading had been by white authors. And so I wanted to understand more and also support them, with my dollars. And that's really shifted my understanding and expanded it in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I'm really grateful for. And some of it's been fiction and some of it's been nonfiction, so I can kind of get a fuller understanding, I think.
That is a great point. When my oldest offspring came out as trans, 6 years ago, I went to the library and asked the librarians to put together a reading list for me. And a lot of it was young adult reading, and much of it was written by people of color and Black people and Indigenous people and people of all kinds of gender persuasions that I had not been aware of. And that combination of eye-opening really opened a huge amount of information for me. But I also feel like it's something, we can all do. Like the library is an incredible resource. Tressa Johnson, who's a member of the Senior Center Board, is an incredible reference librarian who runs the book club, the Waterfront Book Club. And if you ask her, she will help you develop a list of important reading that will cater to what you feel like your gaps are or what you really want to know more about. So we got these great community resources we can reach out to. If you're a book person, there's almost limitless. Like hundreds now, maybe thousands of books are available on every kind of social justice issue you can think of. Barbara?
Yeah, so another thing I was just realizing is that Seattle Arts and Lectures has, various guest speakers and authors. And so I've been doing that, and I'm really happy to do it virtually now, but they had a series this year where Ijeoma Oluo was the host. And I just think she's incredible. I think she's a real thought leader, and I pay attention to her. And she interviewed Kathy Park Hong. I can't think of anyone else at the moment, but that's another way to really listen to people's experiences in a pretty profound way.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Robin Hunt, do you have a comment?
I feel like I'm an acolyte of Akuyea from many years ago, well trained from working alongside her and watching her at work, bridging gaps years ago before a lot of other people were even courageous or even thinking about trying. In more recent years, I have been working for systemic change, but it's been sort of a different approach, kind of a back door. And I won't go into the specifics, but there are at least 3 or 4 different instances where there's been a marginalized group or a marginalized person being treated differently, discriminated against by a white power structure. They probably wouldn't even think of it that way. An entity, it's including respected entities on the island in Kitsap County, whom I know in their hearts are not intend to be discriminatory or racist or anything. So I've taken the Lillian Walker approach, which is education, explain things to people so they will understand what's going on. And I found, and I suppose you could criticize this approach for, sort of pandering or coddling the white fragility people, but most of the time this brings results. So what we've done is I've gone in often to one of these groups or leaders, white leaders with a person of color. It's almost like the good cop, bad cop. I come in and sort of say, not harshly, but explain how things appear, how it feels. And then the person of color with me can be a little bit softer and say, well, yes, but we understand. But by starting by explaining to the white person, I know this is this is not your intent. You have a good heart. You don't intend that sort of thing. Lay the groundwork that way. The person is open to hearing because you're asserting that they're a good person. And so what we want to do is bring to your attention an incident you may not be aware of, which has caused a lot of hurt in certain other people and groups. And for the most part, this has worked really, really successfully. And not only we achieved some change in the particular person we approached, but even in the institution. And in fact, many times I've been able to get out of the equation and a new bridge has been formed between the person or group of color and the white person in power. And so maybe I'm using white privilege to help build a bridge, but in terms of getting results, it's effective and it gets us where we need to be. And it's, yeah. And there's one incident, which I won't go into, where I'm still stewing about, and I'll probably talk to Akuyea, somebody in private about this, but a person that I expected to be more receptive to this type of input, but instead won't even, a long time friend who won't even talk to him anymore because I think he thinks I accused him of being a racist, which I wasn't. I just wanted to have a conversation in person and he doesn't want to talk to me anymore. So I haven't figured that one out, but that's one of several. And maybe I was a little harsher on him than I was with some of the other people just because I had such high expectations. But anyway, that sort of backdoor approach is what I've been using with the city of Paulsbo in my role as emissary from the tribal council to the city of Paulsbo. And you won't even see the results of most of this probably for another 6 months or a year, but it is from the schism that happened after the Chief Stick shooting and the aftermath of that. We are making huge substantive progress in hearts and minds as well as in structure. It just takes a while to get people to come around to wanting to do this on their own and to celebrate. And as Karen or someone, whoever was talking before, rather than yelling at people or pushing at them, you know, try to tap into their good hearts and get them motivated and informed and enlightened, and they will join the movement. So.
Oh, Robin, I wish everybody had your courage and your courtesy and your strength and your kindness, because it goes such a long way toward healing. And you have stepped up in really important ways. That's one thing I would love to see Bainbridge Island do, is follow that path and make sure that our closest neighbor, the Suquamish tribe, is really respected, admired, and loved as a neighbor, not just driven through it going to buy cheap gas and cigarettes. That's not really what we should have, a real deep relationship. Marva, speak up.
Well, I've never had this type of conversation, or maybe I don't think I've ever had this type of conversation with people that look different from me. And I was on that island on yesterday and we got lost. But in different places that my husband and I was driving in, like it's down in small communities, I saw Black Matter signs up saying, I don't stand for this. It was a positive note. You know, the signs they have out. That touched my heart. I recognized that and I felt good in my heart, my spirit. And I said, wow, there are people that is on this island that does want to do better. Because sometimes we always hear the negative, but I'm looking for the positive, the ones that says, I want to do better. I recognize my biases. I didn't understand it. I didn't know it, because there's things I didn't understand. But I do want to share a book with you guys that I bought for my two daughters. I have, my children have a Black boy that is growing up in this city and over in other side of the water. So I'm really aware of how to communicate with my children as adults and how to communicate with my grandchildren. But this is a really great book. And it's called Having Difficult Conversations with Black Boys. But it's really helped me. I've read the book about, you know, what do I need to say to my Black boys, my Black grandchildren? And it gives you a lot of questions. And what are the biases? And so this, the guy who wrote this book was an NFL football player, very popular now on television. Very good book to start, where you could say, oh, I didn't know that. I never saw that, but is that one of the biases? Is that one of the thoughts that I have about Black children or Black men? So very good book. I just wanted to share that with you. So as much as we all know and learn, we learn about one another through books, through media, through various ways. And it's up to us to be what we want to be. Do we want to hold those negative feelings and thoughts? They don't help us at all. And I remember Karen taught many, many years about the bitter root that's buried deep inside us. And those bitter roots have to be plucked little by little. The whole root don't always come at once, but you just keep gnawing on it. And before you know it, that root is up. So that's one of the things that I hold on to, even in my own life. If I have biases against white people or Native people, I even have to say, wait a minute, Marva. You know, they think about how people may think about you. Is that fair? And I ask myself that too. So I'm in those same shoes that you walk. I have to ask those questions as well. Or people in my inner city, in my community, when we have conversations, we check one another too. So I just want you to know that we have to do a self-check and talk very open and truthful about, wait a minute, why do you feel that way? Because when I grew up in Ohio, my brother-in-law was very negative against white people. And all I heard as a child, the white people this, the white people that. Some of it was true, some of it wasn't true. So I had to upchuck those biases and say, that was his issue, not mine, because my mother raised us with love. And so he didn't get raised the same way as I did. So I'm saying we got to deal with it too. And we have to move those things aside as well. So I just wanted to share that with all of you.
Oh, thank you, Marva. Reed put the book and author and title in the chat if any of you want to get a hold of it. I think the library has that book too. And again, you know, we've got this rich, you know, anyone who lives on Bainbridge and has a Bainbridge library card can also get a Seattle Public Library card. And they have like 20,000 audiobooks and online books you can get with an e-card. And they have even better collection than we do here in Kitsap. So there's lots of resources for free out there these days.
And I thought I saw Marietta's hand up for a while.
Oh, did you?
It went down, but I saw it up for quite a while.
You. Thank you for telling me, because I find it hard to track. Marietta, are you still with us?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Akuyea. That was sweet of you. I just, the conversation was so rich. I was you know, swept away by the other people's comments. So I appreciate everybody's, what they have had to say. I was just sort of reflecting back on what Marva had asked earlier about, like, where have you come in this 2 years or, you know, several years since? I would say George Floyd was kind of the, you know, the thing that really brought that to, although I remember Rodney King very well too. I'm 51, so I remember that. And I wanted to say, in answer to that I feel like I had this fairly significant momentum right at first, right? Like, you know, I did a lot of reading and I thought, you know, I started to understand this, you know, where all this was coming from. Okay. And then I would still make a lot of mistakes.
Okay.
And it feels like I felt like, oh, I know all this now and I understand this. And intellectually, I've got my mind around this. And then I would you know, I would react to something and I would think to myself, well, you know, that's that racist, that embedded racist person that you are, that you can't, it's just, so yeah. So I guess I would just say, yeah, I think I've done some work, but I fall back into those old patterns, and I think this is just like this ongoing thing that's going to be part of our life forever. And I just want to be really cognizant of that for myself, because I feel like, oh, you know, I understand it now and I won't do it again. And that's just just so not true. I will do it again and again, and I will have to be reminded, and I will have to remind myself. So yeah, I just am grateful for Akuyea's words and everybody's words about love and just trying to love people into this new place. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marietta. I think that's a really beautiful point that all of us have to forgive ourselves over
Yes.
and over. I mean, think about New Year's resolutions. Why do you have to keep making them? It's because we break it within minutes, right? It's really hard to change our habits of any kind, whether it's smoking or, internalized racism or homophobia or all kinds of things. We have to keep pulling out, like Marva said, or like Akuyea told Marva years ago, pulling out the bitter roots, right? And saying, I don't really want to live with this corrosive,
Yeah.
destructive spirit. I really don't want it in my soul, and let's get rid of it. But any of you who are gardeners, think about bindweed. It doesn't come up in one sweet movement. It can take years to get all those roots out. So we've got spiritual bindweed, all of us. Rita, you got a question or a point?
Well, I was going to say that in our family, we have a lot. There was 8 kids in our family. And so I've got several brother-in-laws. My sisters married Black men back in the early 70s. So it's been a real challenge sometimes, because I sometimes was afraid for their safety when they were out together, because people were very cruel. We lived, Seattle's a pretty progressive town. I mean, even back in, still a pretty liberal town, but still, it's really interesting. And I have a niece who is half Black and half white, and she's got children, and they're like blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls. And then she's in the store with them, and she has had some really bad comments and stuff. And she does not want to be Black so bad. And I thought, you are such a beautiful young woman.
Yeah.
And that just makes me sad, but
yeah,
it just makes me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I comment a little bit? Because Rita, you hit on something so embedded within us that we walk in that oppressive state, and how it manifests and shows up, and even our children that are biracial, how they struggle with their identity, and they don't want to be Black because they're taking on all of that hate and anger and oppression, and they want to get away with it, so they want to flee from who they are to a protective place, which they think, if I can pass and I can assimilate, and if I can just be, on the other side, I won't have to be subject to all of this hate and all of this perpetuated oppression and racism. I won't be the subject of this stuff that comes out of the hearts of others, that they hate me for my skin, they hate me because of my race, they hate me. And so we're dealing with all of these dynamics, and how do we bring healing to that? And we know the harm that is perpetuating, we understand it, we see it, but yet in the same breath, we have those that will stand by on the sidelines and be even participants and observers of all of these things that are manifesting right in front of us, and sometimes in fear won't even say anything. I can remember when my children was in school, and they had friends that they would say, I told my children, I said, a friend shows himself friendly, but you thought that you had a friend that would stand with you when things got rough and when things were tough and when they began to be attacked, and looked around and no one was there to help and to stand by them, or that they would stand in defense and say, that is wrong, you need to stop that. And so that was disheartening, and that was discouraging. And when our young people are growing and developing, and they're trying to find out who they are, all these dynamics are shaping how they feel about themselves and how they will treat others and how they would treat themselves. So, you know, because when my child came and said to me, I don't want to be Black, that thing went through me. I didn't know what kind of language to give him. How can I make it? I needed to understand what is all happening. Now, this is a child. This is a baby in the 3rd grade. And yet they can discern and they can feel how they're being treated and how they're being valued and devalued and how they are being racially abused and racially bullied within the environments and the cultures. And our children, all of our children, whether they're Black or white, they have been in all of this chaos and confusion. How do we disrupt that? Because that is what has been perpetuated generation after generation after generation. That's why truth and reconciliation has to start. And guess what? We have to start teaching it to our children so that generation won't continue to perpetuate to the next generation. So when we talk about critical race theory, why it shouldn't be in the school and all of this, if we just start with truth and build from truth and be able to start healing and start reconciling the systems as well as the history, as well as the culture that has continued to harm all of us, not just the Blacks, not just the whites, not just the Jews, not just the indigenous, not just the Hispanics, not just the Japanese, the behavior. And one of the things that Miss Rita was talking about, you know, it's hurtful on all sides. But then when we begin to look at what are we dealing with, when Marietta was saying, you know, she said, this thing is in us. And then it's just like the old sin nature. It's still there. And we've got to die daily to this thing. We got to begin to start working on it because we know that it has strongholds in us, and we've got to deal with ourselves, and we've got to start changing. Change starts with us. And so there's a lot. It's not just, oh, let's just have a good conversation. We got work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. And it starts with us here, all of us here right now, what we're doing right now. And so let's begin, because we're talking about cultivating the change. Cultivating the change starts with us cultivating what's inside us so that we can make an impact for change for our children and for their children's children and the next generation and from the generation after them. And so I'm starting from today. You know, I can't change what happened yesterday, but I can change what I'm doing today, and I can change what I'll do tomorrow. But it has to start. And we have to seed and cultivate this change.
Exactly, Karen. And, you know, I think about, right, what Marva said is like that, you know, how have we changed in the last few years? Well, I think the question now is, how do we plan to change today and tomorrow and from now on? And who's going to walk with us? Who should we take with us? And who can we work with? Because, you know, kids, grandkids, neighbors, friends, we all have a circle of people. And I think making a real point of bringing this kind of conversation forward wherever we can, in whatever way fits. You don't talk to a 3-year-old the way you talk to an 80-year-old or a 70-year-old, but you talk. And so how we bring these things forward, I think, is really something we can all be thinking about and working at. You're right, Karen, because, you know, it's great that we're having conversations that we probably wouldn't have had even 10 years ago. But there's conversations we still need to have, and there's work we need to do. You're absolutely right. And I'm just, thank you, everybody who's here. I appreciate your presence, and I appreciate the ripples that will go out from all of our actions as we keep learning and keep listening and keep being willing. I think that willingness is huge, because that's the hardest part, is to be willing over and over to be vulnerable, to be willing over and over to learn. To say, oh my God, I did it again. I can't believe I did that or said that or didn't do this or didn't say that. But acknowledging and forgiving ourselves and moving forward. I found out yesterday, I was at a peace rally down in Waterfront Park by the Senior Center. And one of the people said that yesterday was, in the Russian Orthodox Church, the day of forgiveness. and they were all praying for Putin and for the soldiers in the army. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's the piece that we need to remember, is like forgiveness for ourselves and each other is ongoing. And because we can forgive ourselves and each other and move forward, we're going to get somewhere, and it's going to be a better somewhere.
Yes.
Peggi.erickson.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Akuyea. I'm really, really enjoying this conversation. So awesome. I just wanted to add that, you know, for those of us on here that are identify as white people, you know, one of the great skills we can learn in this work is how to just humbly apologize. You know, the times that we say the wrong thing, you know, and we're called out. You know, it's so easy to get defensive and, oh, I'm not a racist, the racists are over there, you know, and to just own, you know, the things that are still within us, because we were all socialized into this mindset of racism and fear of Black people and grabbing onto our purses when we go by young Black men and all those all that BS, you know. And so just learning how to just say, gosh, I'm sorry, I apologize. And is there anything I can do to make an amend? You know, just being able to own that is such a great skill, because it is true, we make mistakes and we have to own them. We have to say to other people, you know, gee, I see what I did. Thank you for telling me I did that. I appreciate it.
I love that, Peggy. Thank you. Well, we've got 1 minute. Does anybody have a heart full of something they want to?
Well, I will just respond to Debbie's question about will the Sippin Tea talks continue. We certainly hope so, and we're looking for support to keep it going, because it is not, as we've said several times, a one and done. We got some bindweed and we got to keep gardening. So I would call it an irregular series. Does that sound okay, Akuyea? So we'll keep it going, but we aren't promising to do it, you know, 2 times a week or 2:30 on Wednesday or whatever. So if you want to stay connected to this group, I know that Ann is really good about sending out emails. God bless you. So if you send her an email, ann.lovejoy@gmail.com, she will put you in her list. And
Great.
if you want to let the Senior Center know, we can also put you in our list, but whatever feels comfortable for you.
You can also join the Senior Center if you're not a member yet. And then you'll get the Monday emails, which have all the things that happen. A lot of people think they're members and they don't realize that maybe you joined 5 years ago, but you actually have to join every year. This is a great time to do it. And it supports things like this and all the other great work we're trying to bring forward. So I would encourage you.
And I'd also like to say, those that want to continue this work, please, KitsapERACE, Kitsapsurj. We are doing some tremendous, ERACE. They are doing tremendous work. We're continually working on moving race equity forward, continuously moving community engagement and all of these issues forward, you know, with all of the initiatives that are on the table, even with the Truth and Reconciliation. So please join us with the work. The work is vital and important. We have to cultivate change for our communities and for our county. And, you know, I know that this, the world is huge and the nation is huge, but this work begins right here at home. This work begins right here in our own communities. You know, charity begins here in our own families, with our own communities, with our own cities, with our own county. And so if we take those baby steps, we can make change here for all of us.